Hi everyone, good evening. This is Garima Gupta here from the iDream Career team, welcoming everybody here today for one of our, great webinars, which we would be covering about career options in pharmaceutical and the biotech industry. Um, Welcoming all the eminent school teachers, principals, students, and various career counselors to this webinar today. We iDream Career totally believe that during this corona pandemic, all of you will be able to utilize the maximum of this quarantine or the stay at home period. And we really hope that you will be able to draw the maximum benefits out of this webinar series that we have been doing. So just to give some of you a brief, iDream Career is a career counseling firm, and the foundation of our firm perhaps lies in providing unbiased career guidance to everybody who's there. Primarily, we work with students from 9 to 12 class. We also work with a lot of governments. We've also worked with states. We've got various projects with which we work. To name a few, as a part of UNICEF project, we work with 9 state governments. At the same time, we work with a lot of B2B schools and private entities. We also do a lot of CSR work. To name a few, we work with Samhita Academy, we work with Navy Children's School, Sindhya School, Sri Ram School, um, Symbiosis, etc., etc. So today, despite all these things, we've gathered here to actually have this webinar conducted by Mr. Sandeep Datta Gupta, who's a partner at DRG Consulting. It is a leading global insight enabled sciences consultancy. And for some of you who may actually not know about Sandeep, so Sandeep, firstly, he has been kind enough to be present from USA today for all of us. It's 7 in the morning for him, but he's woken up early specifically to help us with this webinar. So Sandeep holds almost 17 years of extensive experience. He has done his B Pharma from Jadavpur University, and then he's moved on to doing a PhD in healthcare administration from University of Louisiana at Monroe. All right, he's worked with Pfizer. He's been an advisory board member with Akbarbit, and right now he's a partner for almost 2 years with DRG Consulting. So Sandeep, thank you so much. For being here, for accepting our invitation. And over to you, please.
All right. Thanks, Karima. I hope everyone can see my slides. Thanks again, and good morning from a very rainy, cloudy, and a very, very empty New York City here. We are all quarantined at home for almost 5 weeks. So hopefully there is light at the end of the tunnel over here. And thanks again for iDream Career for arranging this kind of a webinar. Hopefully this is useful to everyone. So as Garima said, first of all, I have very, very few slides. I just want to give you a little bit of a background, on what brought me into the pharmaceutical industry and working here for almost 25 years. So as Garima said, I did my undergraduate in pharmacy. Then I worked as a sales representative actually for an Indian company called Lupin in Calcutta. Then I came to US, did my graduate studies in healthcare administration, and then had a very long stint with Pfizer, leaving them in 2013, and then joining the consulting side, and have been doing consulting for mostly pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies for almost about close to 7 or 8 years. So today I'm going to touch mostly on some of the basic aspects of skills, competences, behavior, and some additional insights on what the industry actually looks for. And obviously the whole coronavirus brought more focus on healthcare, probably a lot more than any industry in a very, very long time. So I think there is a different level of interest in what everyone does how things are and what can be done to create a better future for human in general. So there is a lot of interest right now. Every second or third article is about how to create cheap ventilators, from how to carry on, a clinical trial for vaccines. How fast can a drug be, commercialized in the market from research labs? So all of these things are being discussed, more frequently and more heavily than ever before, which also brings a lot of attention to this profession that comes with it. So in general, so I personally specialize in pharmaceutical pricing, but I just want to highlight a couple of areas where there are, quite a bit of opportunities outside of what I personally do. So definitely, research is a very, very big component of pharmaceutical industry in general, because if new products do not come to the market, the companies will not have enough revenue generated from these products in order to sustain. So in general, pharmaceutical industry has about 95 to 96% failure rate, which means only about 3 to 4% of the products actually become successful. So you can imagine that, each of those products need to recover the investment of the failed products in order for the industry to sustain. So it's also one of the industry that has very, very heavy investment in R&D, and that hasn't gone away, at least in the last 25, 30 years that I have been part of. Yes, the investment types have changed. There are a lot of emphasis on genetics. There is a lot of emphasis on doing, a lot of genetic mapping research, a lot of recent interest and investment in using artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify what are those type of, specialty type of molecules that can be converted to a drug. So those kind of, more of application of newest scientific and even in sometimes engineering aspects are coming into play in the pharmaceutical industry. But overall, research plays probably the most important role in the industry, especially in the US and most of the developed world. And in research, you have predominantly, PhD folks, and they have some form of biological sciences background, also could be chemistry. And more we are seeing biomedical engineering or even biotechnology, microbiology, genetics, those kind of backgrounds are also showing up in people's resume when we look into them. So the next thing becomes is that, okay, if you have a product that is looking very good in the research setting, whether it's in the labs or in clinical trials involving human beings, then how to get that product approved through the various regulatory agencies like FDA in US, the corresponding agency called the European Medical Agency or EMA in Europe. So obviously in that aspects, i.e. people who work in regulatory, they have a very good understanding of the drug approval process, what kind of data that needs to be generated, how the information should be presented, how the overall regulatory package for a new drug needs to be submitted, how you need to interact with agencies like FDA and EMA. So those kind of skill sets are required for people working in the regulatory side of the business. Obviously, most of them have some kind of a background in science, but it's not an explicit requirement to join the regulatory side. Obviously, it helps because at the end of the day, you're looking at what is the risk-benefit assessments in healthcare, and that's what the regulatory agencies decide. I think in the more recent the more recent weeks, you have seen, this particular product called, HCQ or hydroxychloroquine. Everyone thinks that it's a cure or some kind of a treatment for coronavirus. But how come it is not indicated for coronavirus when you search for it in the scientific literature? Because nobody has formally completed a well-designed clinical trial that can talk about the exact risk benefit of HCQ in disease that is caused because of coronavirus. And that gives you an example where the research may have fallen short. So far, there are only about 2 or 3 very small studies that are currently available. They are not big enough, they are not robust enough, and they were not designed to provide a population level approval that you require in order for the drug to be commercialized. So what I mean for that is that they may not meet the requirements for FDA and EMA in order for HCQ or any combination thereof to be used for coronavirus patients very widely by various physicians across different countries. So that probably gives you a little bit of, hopefully a bit of an understanding on how the regulatory functions play an important role even before the product reaches the market. So when the drug is approved based on the data submitted by FDA and EMA agencies, then it needs to be commercialized, i.e., the manufacturer needs to make money by selling the drug. So majority of the people who are on the commercial side have some kind of a business background. By saying that, I also want to highlight that most MBAs do not look for pharmaceutical industry as their first choice. It is a given fact. They all like to go to, work in the financial service and investment banks, the McKinseys and so on and so forth. So most of the MBAs that come into the pharma industry, they probably get exposure to some kind of healthcare related aspect during their initial, years after they graduate from MBA. And then they find healthcare probably, relatively more interesting and more fulfilling than other, business areas. So that's why, we find a lot of MBAs who may not have started their career in healthcare or pharmaceutical industry tend to join at a very later stage after they understand how, in general, a business works, and then they try to adapt themselves into the, the nuances of the pharmaceutical industry or healthcare industry in general. There are other areas, manufacturing. There are areas called biostatistics. There are areas in medical affairs who are also, equally important in the within a pharmaceutical company and or the industry, and they tend to attract quite a bit of people because of the specialized functions that they need. In some areas like statistics and medicine, obviously there are degrees available, but not necessarily in manufacturing. So sometimes people who are chemical engineers, we have seen them applying for a lot of pharmaceutical manufacturing jobs, and other, similar engineers that also form, a part of the group that manages the pharmaceutical manufacturing within the pharma, or the biotechnology companies. So these are, kind of the 4 very broad areas. I mean, there are obviously smaller functional areas such as market research, so on and so forth, that also attract similar amount of graduates into the jobs. But these are some of the, more of the core areas that a pharma or a biotech company cannot live without. So hence, I kind of highlighted these areas a lot more than going into details of every possible opportunities within this industry. So I think the question comes, what is it that prepares a master's or a PhD student, especially within the US academic curriculum, to teach? I think it comes down to one very simple question: can you solve a problem? And that's the part is what we look into when we are hiring people in any of these areas that I discussed and highlighted before. So obviously, nobody second guesses your technical skill. When you have a master's or a PhD coming out of a U.S. university, nobody second guesses that, okay, did you really do something or is just a fake resume? So, since no one questions about your technical skill, the immediate question becomes, do you have the right set of skills and behavior that you can demonstrate when you join a particular organization at any level? Obviously, teamwork plays a big role, because you need to know how to work with others without pissing them off. That's a big thing. And then I think one core area that we always look into, that if you're given a problem that you may not have faced before, are you able to dissect a problem and be able to identify solutions? Because probably, while you are studying, you probably never faced this kind of a problem before. That we know. But what we look for is that if you're given a problem, how do you actually bring it down into smaller problems that can be solved and then rolled back and create a more integrated solution? That is the kind of a mental aptitude we look for during the interview process, even sometimes during the screening of the candidates, because that's where lies the crux of your skill set, that based on what you have learned in graduate studies or in US universities to your master's or PhD, what is it that you are able to do by using those skills, and whether you are able to do it together with the other bunch of people, and whether you are able to find solutions using different creative ideas. So that's basically what we look for when we look into a candidate. And then understanding of a bit of a trade-off, because we work in an industry where we are always working with a very small amount of information. And what I mean by that is that whenever, if you take an example of clinical trials that actually allows a drug to be approved, most clinical trials are done in about, say, 500 to 1,000 patients on an average, give or take. Now, if it's in cancer products, it's even less. But when the product gets approved, it gets used for, at least 20,000, 30,000, if not 20 million, 30 million patients, depending on the disease. So from a number perspective, we are always working with very small amount of information and then trying to use that information to help a much bigger population size. So, philosophically, we are always doing a trade-off at every point in every decision making, that for every problem that we are facing in this industry or within a particular company. So when you are asked to solve a problem, how do you kind of trade off? What are some of the scenarios that you think of in order to create those trade-offs? Are those scenarios really valid, or are they simply theoretical? When you think of trade-offs, you're thinking, okay, what is the opportunity and the downside of every possible options that you're able to come up with? Obviously, with more experience, you have more understanding of which are the trade-offs that are most relevant. But in general, can your mind process what trade-off is? That is the most critical aspect. And last but not least, from a skill set perspective, is a form of what we call as a perpetual learning or curiosity. If you're not interested in what is the next big thing or what is the next best thing, you will probably not be able to survive in this industry too long. If you think that, because you have a master's or a PhD, so you know enough already, that is usually the end of your career in this industry. So that's a kind of a thing, sometimes we would proactively ask the candidates, tell me 5 areas that you want to learn in next 5 years. We just want to see, have they thought about, do they even know the things that they don't know? So those kind of things kind of come through relatively easily during either screening call or in the earlier phase of the interviews. So those are some of the, maybe 3 or 4 core skill areas that we emphasize quite a bit on. And the next one is behavior. I mean, obviously, a bit of a can-do attitude, acknowledge the limitations, but seek help from experts. And that's very, very critical, because despite the fact that you may or may not have biological sciences background, and you may or may not have a master's or a PhD, you need to understand there that there are more people who knows more than you. So how do you seek help from the experts in certain areas that you may not be even aware of exist? So that's kind of a behavioral aspect that we look into. So we would usually ask questions like, give me an example where you have been given a problem that you need to solve, but you realize that about 50% of the resources that you need are not in your core areas of expertise. So how do you reach out to other experts within your organization who may not report into you and come up with a solution that is best for the business? So those are the kind of aspects that we see. Can you reach out to other people who knows more than you do, and can you seek their help to move things forward? Obviously, integrity is a big thing, because we work in an industry that is heavily regulated. So we have to make sure that what we are talking about, what we are producing both publicly and inside the corporation, are sort of looked into, and nothing is falsified or even provided any kind of a conjecture that cannot be substantiated or validated. And last but not least, what we look for is a professional discipline. Like, do you have the discipline to be able to function in a matrix type environment where you are forced to work with people who may be reporting to completely different bosses? So that's the kind of thing that we look for in terms of, the core set of skills and behaviors. These are fairly consistent amongst pharmaceutical companies, probably even for large organizations, irrespective of the industry. But these are some of the areas that we almost consistently look into before offering potential opportunities for employment to any candidates coming through. And this is my last slide, so hopefully I leave quite a bit of time for Q&A. So question becomes, what can a pharmacy degree in India offer you for a subsequent career in pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry in US? I think the one thing that happens is that every US university requires 16 years of education before you can apply for so-called graduate school, which comprises of master's and PhD programs. So since pharmacy programs are all 4 years compared to a science major in India, you are automatically eligible to apply for master's or PhD. Okay, you don't have to do 1 year of master's in India before you need to apply, which is the case for a lot of say a chemistry or a biology or a physiology or a microbiology undergraduate majors in India. A lot of the local college graduates, i.e. those who graduate with a bachelor's degree from US universities, they are not immediately interested into getting back into school, because most of them actually go to college with quite a bit of the student loan on their head. So they want to enjoy a bit of the job environment and kind of make some money before they decide what they want to do and when they want to go to graduate school. So compared to a lot of the other areas, and the fact that pharmacy in US is a 6-year program, so you don't see an immediate interest from amongst a lot of college graduates to get into a master's or PhD programs in pharmaceutical sciences. So that opens up a bit of a less competition in this space. So that definitely creates an opportunity for pharmacy or biological sciences or graduates from India to apply. And the other thing that happens is, most professional pharmacists, that means those who work in pharmacy, they do not like they do not like to come to work in pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. So there are more opportunities for students graduating with master's and PhD in pharmacy area. You do not have as much of a direct local competition for every job that is available. So that definitely creates a little bit of a flexibility for a lot of the MS PhD students to apply for jobs in these pharmaceutical companies. And last but not least, like I have seen quite a bit of people who, over the years of experience, have been able to switch to more of a marketing commercial roles, even without getting an MBA. Those are relatively rare, but these are not necessarily uncommon. So if you have quite a bit of understanding of how the business works, and you have worked inside for about 7 to 8 years in some kind of a role, and have been managing people, a lot of the different types of businesses, different types of products, it's not unusual for people to move into the commercial side, even without going through a formal MBA, after working for about 6, 7, or sometimes even 10 years. So just from my, kind of a past observations in almost 20 plus years, these are some of the areas I feel that there is a bit of a opportunity for Indians coming into US with backgrounds in pharmaceutical or biotechnology areas. And I see, more and more people actually applying for this kind of jobs whose undergraduate training are from countries outside of US. So let me stop here, and I know you probably have a lot of questions. That was my last slide, so I'm happy to provide any of my perspectives or answer any of the questions that you may have.
All right, Sandeep, thanks. So for everybody who's right now watching this on YouTube, requesting everyone to please jot down your questions and put it on our chat box. So we'll be taking these questions one by one. We'll be moderating the chat, and you'll have our team taking up your questions, please. So Sandeep, coming to the questions, to start with, one of the questions says that which are the top countries where big pharma right now keeps its R&D, and what is the ratio that lies in India?
So good question. So in India, R&D is mainly used for tax exemption. Let me be very honest. There are some companies who are trying to do smaller level of R&Ds, but they are mostly looking into out-licensing their products to bigger pharmaceutical companies. So that is the business model that they are mostly using in India. So proportionately speaking, if you want to stay in R&D in India, your options are relatively limited. And so that's, one thing. There are, venture capital supported biotech R&D that's happening in India, but they're not necessarily hiring in large numbers. And that's why they're looking for more experienced people who may have a stint in US or Europe before they have been asked to move back. So that's the trend that I have seen even in the last 3-4 years. In terms of where they are hiring, obviously most of you know that US has the highest level of pharma R&D investment. So obviously the proportionate hiring in US is significantly higher. There are a lot of European companies, i.e. companies that are headquartered in Europe, are also hiring throughout Europe in a lot of their R&D sites. I would say, if you want me to make a guess, I would say 70% in US, about 26, 27% in Europe, and the rest is kind of spread all over the world. And that includes Japan, China, and few selected pockets in Southeast Asia.
All right.
I hope that answers the question.
Yes, definitely it does. It does. All right. So moving on to the next question. The users want to know perhaps your opinion, post everything that is going on. How do you see, manufacturing happening within China? And do you think any major organizations have, moved uh, out of China or, done any transition for that matter?
Good question. So, manufacturing of anything, you just cannot remove manufacturing plants from one country, move to the other. Let's be very, very realistic about it. And that's just the physical part of it. The reason why so many manufacturers moved to China was purely financial. So unless other countries can provide similar kind of financial structure, i.e. financial benefit of low cost, large scale manufacturing, including local talent, it is very hard for any company to move any type of manufacturing, not just pharma. I mean, Apple just cannot move their iPhone manufacturing abruptly entirely from China and move to other countries. It's just impossible. In pharmaceutical, it has even a much bigger challenge because almost 90% of manufacturing facilities have to be approved by FDA if the manufacturer wants to market the products coming out of those manufacturing facilities to be marketed in US. So there is a standardized regulatory approval process called GMP. It's very simple, actually. It's called Good Manufacturing Practice. So every factory that produces drugs that are marketed in US or Europe needs to be FDA GMP certified. Okay, it takes about 2 years for a plant to open and start manufacturing products, and the first batch of the products coming out of the factory ready for US marketing. Okay, so this 2-year time lag, basically during that time, that cost of running a factory for 2 years without making money out of the products coming out of it is entirely on the books of the manufacturer. So financially, it's just not possible to immediately, stop manufacturing in one country and move the manufacturing facility to the other, even more so in pharmaceutical, because here your product is not like, a consumer product. It's a product that impacts, people's health. People could die if the product is not manufactured properly. So, but is there, directionally, are manufacturers looking at creating alternative spots? Yes, they are always looking for opportunities where they can manufacture using a lower cost base with greater efficiency and keep a margin that has been, that they have seen for certain types of products. So I personally don't see a big shift in manufacturing going away from China. But yes, probably new manufacturing units may not go to China because of what is going on in the health field in that country.
All right, great. Fine. So in the meanwhile, while I'm asking a few more questions, just for the users who are right now there on YouTube, please make sure you are penning down your questions on the chat box and we'll take them up one by one. All right, so moving on to the next question, Sandeep. It's more about, the courses and the careers, pertaining to the pharma industry. So, one of our members wants to know that how relevant, are the courses in India and pharma, and, are they updated as per the international standards? Because a lot of times we've seen that, courses like PhDs often take much longer than the time which is invested abroad. So are these kind of things true, and would you recommend anything to pursue a PhD?
So it's a very good question. I mean, the medicine has has gone has advanced so fast that it's getting very, very difficult to keep up with everything that is new in medicine. Right now, you can actually take cancer cells outside, take the cancer cells from your body, infuse with a different product in Petri dish, and put the cells back into a patient. Now, this is probably some of the innovations. We are lucky that we are seeing this kind of innovations, in the medical side. So that goes directly into how obsolete, those kind of courses become as soon as you finish studying it. I think, that's probably more of a critical question. I think the basic knowledge of the human body, how the drugs work inside the body, or how the body reacts to a chemical such as a drug. Those kind of basic things are still being taught very well. I mean, I see most of the Indian colleges and universities are usually using top of the line textbooks that are being followed almost equally well in every country at the undergraduate level. I think where it makes a bit of a difference is the awareness of the innovation in some of the masters and PhDs that I've seen in India, and also the whole idea that I really do not need to know everything as long as I know a lot about few things. I think that philosophically is slightly different. I think there is expectations that if someone is doing master's or PhD in India, because so very few people actually do it in some of the healthcare area that is not medicine, that I think there's a little bit of a rush to get the degree done instead of looking for the right research topic that is most relevant. That's where I have seen, like, sometimes, validating something in a new environment has been somebody's PhD research topic, which is okay to get a PhD, but it's not something that teaches any person new things about your work. So again, I don't want to overgeneralize, based on my selected exposure, but in general, I think the undergraduate curriculums in India are pretty good. I think the postgraduates is where there is still, a few things that can be done better. Whereas in US, it's diametrically opposite. The undergraduate is kind of okay. But their master's and PhD programs are very, very solid in the sense that everyone is looking to find the next best thing. They're not looking to repeat something that somebody has done just to go through and get a master's or a PhD under their belt. So that's, kind of my observation. But otherwise, I mean, most students I have seen with sort of a BS in pharmacy or B Pharm degrees have come up with pretty good scientific knowledge coming out of India.
Great. All right. So moving to the next question, how do you see, an entrepreneur planning his or her journey in the pharma industry on a small scale, perhaps?
It requires a huge upfront cost. The fixed cost of opening a new pharmaceutical company is huge. Unless you're trying to copy and just keep your business confined to the generic side of the industry. And economists will tell you that pharmaceutical industry probably has one of the highest barrier to entry because it is so heavily regulated. I was telling all of you that the 2 years it takes to take a drug out, manufactured in a factory and being out of the gate in order to to get it sold. So think about it, those 2 years, you are not making any money at all. So the capital investment to start a new pharmaceutical company is very, very high. And technology cannot change it because you still have to produce a product that has been proven to be effective in clinical trials, go through the FDA and EMA regulatory approval, and then commercialize it. So unless you are supported by, a few $1,000,000, and I'm talking in, 15 to 20 million US dollars, and somebody gives the money to you and say, listen, come back to me in 5 or 10 years, those are the only way to probably, be a successful entrepreneur in pharmaceutical industries. I mean, if you look around in India, I mean, are there new pharmaceutical companies that have come up that are in the top 5 or top 10? Most likely not. These are all family-run industries that have been doing the same thing in this space for the last, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. That tells you how difficult it is to start a company that is exclusively, generating new product, and commercializing new product. But where are the opportunities for an entrepreneur in pharmaceutical industry? I think that there is a huge opportunity in some of the peripheral services. Like a lot of market research are very much based towards talking to physicians, talking to hospital people who work in hospitals, the hospital CEOs, CFOs, etc. Some of the peripheral industries that support the pharmaceutical industry is definitely an opportunity for a lot of entrepreneurs, those who want to be part of the industry but may not have the financial strength to start a new company on his or her own. And definitely, as medicine is getting more and more personalized, i.e., that now you can find diagnostic tests that if you give that test and the test turns out to be positive, only then a person is eligible to get a particular cancer drug, for example. So in the diagnostic testing area, there is a lot of opportunities. But if you're thinking of pure pharmaceutical industry, which means developing and commercializing new products, it's a very, very high barrier to entry, unless you are extremely, you're very well supported on the financial side of it. And the venture capitalists in India or outside of US and Europe, they do not have pharma or biotech in their priorities, to be very honest. And you can ask a lot of people around, they will rather invest into the next Flipkart or Amazon, but they are not going to invest in the next GlaxoSmithKline or a Pfizer. It's mainly because they know the return on investment is not that great and not that quick, because the failure rate in pharmaceutical industries is above 95%. So I don't want to discourage somebody, but I just want to let that person be aware of what it takes to be successful as an entrepreneur in this industry.
All right, Sandeep, thanks for that elaborate answer. So moving to the next question. So as of now, a lot of countries have been ordering medicines from India. So do you think that India perhaps, is on the verge of becoming a grandmaster, or perhaps, something supreme, perhaps, in terms of a supplier for other countries post-corona?
I mean, I think on most of the areas, I think India still is a great, source for a lot of generic products, or even what we would call as a API, which stands for active pharmaceutical ingredient. So a lot of the products need, a lot of smaller chemicals that go into making a particular drug. So those are heavily supplied by India quite a bit. I think the highest margins on the products are the research-based innovative products. So the average profit margin on a patented product is anywhere between 70 to 85%, depending on whether it's a new product or it has been in the market for a while. For generics, that margin is barely 25%. So that gives you a bit of a financial understanding why there are more pharmaceutical companies with a higher margins that come from the US and Europe, and India hasn't as much invested into that R&D side as actively. If we look at China's model, China even 10 years back thought that they can beat India in the generic side. Then they realized that the margins are not as great, and it is very difficult to sustain very low margin business year after year after year. So even if you look at some of the consolidation that has happened in India, Piramal sold his business to Abbott. Ranbaxy could not survive on its own. It was the biggest player in the Indian market. So when your margin gets squeezed, it is very difficult to sustain, consistently year after year after year, because you need products with higher margin in order to sustain any business. And from that perspective, pharmaceutical is not very, very different. Right now, yes, I think a lot of companies, a lot of countries are looking at India as a source, but whether they want to play a big role in a very small sector of the industry, or they want to play a big role in a big sector of the industry, I think that is the most important question. And for India, that hasn't gone away in last 20 years. So very few new products have come out of India. But if the industry is able to sustain with a 25% margin, compared to a 70 or 80% margin, they can definitely provide a lot of good sources of a lot of products to the rest of the world.
All right. What do you mean by a generic pharma product? I mean, you've used this term very frequently. I mean, if you could.
Yeah. So for example, think of a product like aspirin, right? I mean, it has at least 22. I think there are about 100 different brands of aspirin that are available in India. So what happens in one thing in pharmaceutical industry? Sorry, I should have highlighted this before. Once you have a patent on a product, it expires automatically after 17 years. So the moment a product reaches a market in US, we know exactly the date in which the product can be manufactured by other companies such as Dr. Reddy's or Ranbaxy's or other generic manufacturers that do not own the patent on the product. So it has a fixed patent life of 17 years. So within that, the 17 years covers from the day you have applied for the patent, which could be, at the time when you just did a small studies in a couple of animal models and found that this product could be effective in humans. So you immediately apply for a patent on that product. And right from that day, you have 17 years before which anybody can manufacture that product and sell it. So that's what we call as the generics, or like a generic product. So that's how you have 100 or 200 aspirins, because aspirin's patent expired long time back. So that creates the biggest challenge for the pharmaceutical industry, that you need to come up with new products, very, very frequently, because that is your biggest source of revenue. So what happens when a product goes off patent, as we would call it? Immediately the price drops about 60 to 80% of the original price. And then the market gets so crowded that you are looking for market share around barely 1 or 2% in order to sustain your margins, which is probably not the case when the product is under patent. Then you have exclusivity on that product and you can price it the way you like and make a lot of money out of it. So, I mean, in some way, think of, Microsoft Office. Think if after 17 years since Microsoft Office launched their software package, anybody can create Microsoft Office package and sell it at 80% of the price. Think of what will happen to Microsoft's business. So if you extrapolate that for every drug that comes out, you can think of what is the erosion of profit, revenue, and for each of these products to the company that has actually brought the product first to the market. So the question would become, will Microsoft even survive if after 10 years, everybody can make Microsoft Office in a small facility using a small laptop and sell it at 80% discount to the original Microsoft Office price? So that's what we call as something on patent versus a product going generic. So anybody can manufacture at any price that they want. The original developer of the product does not have any legal right on the product after 17 years.
Got it. Got it. All right. So just a few questions more. So we've got 3 more in the pipeline. So
Sure.
What opportunities or options abroad specifically would you recommend to someone who's got an experience in clinical research or medical writing?
Clinical research and medical writing. Okay. So, I mean, I think, obviously, if you're doing medical writing, you definitely understand the technical aspects of pharmaceuticals, of healthcare. So I think there is a huge, whenever clinical trials are done, every company wants to publish that results. So there is a huge, area of medical writing or medical writers that are not necessarily directly employed inside the pharmaceutical companies, but there are a lot of other sort of what I call as a peripheral services, those who draft a lot of those publications that you see eventually published in journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, Science, those kind of top-line peer-reviewed journals. So I think someone with a clinical research obviously can help. If they join the company, a pharmaceutical or a biotechnology company, they can help in writing a lot of clinical trial protocols, a lot of the clinical synopsis. But if they want a little bit of a flexibility and wants to be more focused on medical writing, then there is definitely a lot of opportunities in joining one of those medical writing agencies that actually helps the pharmaceutical companies in creating those publications before they are submitted to medical journals.
Okay, all right. Next question, Sandeep. What do you think are the top, 3 or maybe 5 trends in the way diseases are treated? Any specific dosage forms or technologies that are involved?
So I think the way things are treated more and more, what we're looking as, what we call as a precision medicine. So drugs are created based on some of the genetic mutation or genetic setup of types of a subgroup of patients. So I think from that perspective, medicine is becoming much more precise. And I go back to the example of aspirin. Not everyone's headache goes away with aspirin, but nobody knows what are the types of patients whose headaches actually go away with aspirin within 24 or 48 hours. So if you can pinpoint those kind of patients, during the clinical research or during the clinical trials, I think that's one very, very popular trend that is happening across various diseases. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on cancer medications. I think everyone is trying to minimize the side effects of the cancer drugs as much as possible, because sometimes that becomes a much more unbearable part for the patient and therefore, in turn, for the family members, those who are taking care of the patients to be affected much more. So a lot of the focus is on how to reduce the side effects of the cancer products. In terms of dosage forms, yes, there are things like, patches that you can put on your skin. so that you don't have to remember to take the oral pill, or you don't have to remember to go and get insulin before, X hours before you take your meal, so on and so forth. But not all chemical entities. At the end of the day, the pharmaceutical products or drugs are basically a chemical at the end, in its most basic form. So not all chemicals are stable to be made into an oral pill. I think the biggest challenge still now remains, why isn't insulin oral? Everybody has to inject insulin, because insulin is such an interesting chemical that it is not stable in the room temperature. That's why it is only available in the injection form, and you have to refrigerate and so on and so forth. It's because the chemical structure of insulin is such that it breaks down if you leave it in the room temperature, and it becomes ineffective. So obviously, everyone tries to come up with an oral pill because it's the easiest one to take. But I know there are some companies that are looking at putting an oral pill in your mouth, but when it reaches your stomach, it doesn't dissolve. What it does is it generates information about your body and pass it through a sensor into a more trackable device, like in an app. So there are some products that are given in that form, very, very few, hardly I think one or two, that can actually send data back to a recordable device that captures how the product is doing inside your system. But those are innovations that are very difficult to scale up. So I think the use is relatively limited so far, but we are hoping that, one day that would become more of a norm rather than an exception. Other than that, I think, a huge emphasis is given how to make any product how can be easily given to the elderly people, because they not only have sometimes difficulty in swallowing a lot of things, but they also have a lot of other diseases at the same time. So how to make sure that, they are able to take, the 7 or 8 medications they're taking on a daily basis in such a way that they don't forget any one of them. So there are a lot of, technology that is being used, like, a pill box that, would automatically send out a signal to somebody's phone that it's time for him or her to take the medications immediately. So I think, overall, there are a lot of opportunities using technology these days. But at the end of the day, the medicine has to work. And that is still the biggest challenge for the pharmaceutical R&D. And it's probably not going to change. I mean, you can create a lot of technology around the product, but it has to work for biggest population size suffering from particular disease.
Got it. All right. So next question is that, do you think some research of the US companies could actually be outsourced to India? Or are you already doing
as long as it meets the FDA standard, that's the holy grail. If FDA says yes, wherever you are doing research, I don't mind, as long as it meets our standard. And that's one of the reasons why you have noticed the whole discussion about HCQ in coronavirus is because most of the big studies are not done in US. FDA says, yeah, replicate the same study in US and we'll look at the data. So it's more of a regulatory standards rather than the country where the study is being done. And to what extent those studies can be transferable for the broader population. I'll give you an example. Like, there is a particular skin, infections that happens only when someone is heavily exposed to sunlight. Okay, which means it happens in climates which gets very, very hot. So if you're trying to find even a prescription ointment in order to take care of those kind of skin rashes, you cannot do those studies in countries that has a tropical climate and the temperature doesn't go up that much, even if it costs you much less to run those trials. So those are some of the more natural examples where you can do any study on any drug in any country, but number one, does it meet the standards for the regulatory agencies that will actually approve the product, without which you cannot commercialize the product? And secondly, whether the representative population is the one that is largely affected by the disease. One very easy example, most Asians have a very, very high tolerance of pain compared to the non-Asians. So if you have a new pain medication that you are studying and you are doing that in India and China, you will notice that the improvement is much less. Because when these patients join the trial because of some kind of a pain, and if you ask them, in a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate your pain? They would say, oh, barely 4 or 5. Okay, but the same pain could be 7 or 8 if you're studying in the Western population. So just from this basic, information, you can understand that the same product, if you study in India and China, is not going to give the same level of efficacy as it is being used in the Western world. So, and this is just a very simple example of your pain. As you get into more complicated diseases, the manifestation in different types of population is very, very different. So a lot of studies being done on the transferability of the data, but I think it's still getting, a representative population that would manifest the disease in the most representative way. It becomes very, very difficult. So I don't think one can replace the other, but obviously studying in bigger population, such as in Asia or sometimes in Africa, gives a much robust data set that the manufacturers can use.
All right, fine. So, Sandeep, just one last question, before
Sure.
we end this. So, what's your opinion, in terms of the prospects of the pharma industry and the careers in it from a global perspective?
So, at least in US, it says that pharma is the only industry that is recession-proof. Whether it's recession or it's a general usual time, people will fall sick. So, in terms of sustainability of pharmaceutical industry globally, there is no alternative to medicine. Yes, you can do a lot of things right from the beginning, but beginning of your life, honestly, on a personal level, my own father-in-law, who is almost 80 years old, he has been doing yoga for the last 50 years. But who does those kind of things these days? I think our lifestyle, our professional commitments have given everybody much less time to take care of their own health, and more so in doing something preventive. So from a very general, realistic standpoint, the industry is not going to go away. I think what's going to change is that the products need to be, really more effective than what is available in the marketplace. So I think the time for incremental innovation is probably going to be challenged, but there's definitely a lot of opportunities for higher form of innovation that the pharma industry really needs to look for. So just by, helping your HbA1c going down by 1 point because of a new drug may not guarantee commercial success for that new drug. It has to do something more, something better, and something faster. So I think that's where I see, whether it's cancer, whether it's diabetes, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinsonism, or even some of the more typical cardiovascular diseases like high cholesterol, high pressure, etc. That's where incremental innovation is not going to work. But the industry is not going to go away. it's already under pressure to deliver better drugs, but it will always be there because of how the human behavior actually is. People don't change very easily, and unless you change dramatically about your own life and lifestyle, you will always need some kind of pharmaceutical products to make you go through, day to day, depending on your system and the physiology of your life and lifestyle. So I think it's definitely sustainable. Obviously, different public health emergencies like the coronavirus, the SARS, the Ebola, they create a different kind of scrutiny for the industry, but I don't think it's going to go away very soon. And hopefully not, because I'll be out of a job otherwise.
All right, all right. Fine. So I think, Sandeep, that kind of brings us to the end of the questions that have been asked by our users. So
Okay.
yeah. So firstly, before we end this complete live stream, I think we'll be more than thankful to you for definitely taking out the 60-75 minutes plus an early morning schedule for you. And I think
No problem.
it's been just absolutely fantastic. I mean, the way you've kind of explained every question in detail. You've talked out the map and given a few insights. I think it's been a superb interaction with all of us here.
Terrific. I mean, let me just close with one thing. I know in India, going to pharmacy is not seen as something very interesting, attractive, or even sometimes socially acceptable. People always think that, oh, you probably could not get into medical school. That's why you're doing pharmacy. But over in US, besides the the pastor or the priest in the church, pharmacists are the second most trusted profession in this part of the world. So so keep that in mind when you think of career options. And thanks again, Garima and Dipankar and everyone else at the iDream Career for making this happen.
Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks, Sandeep, for taking this time out, and it has been really a great knowledge sharing. As in, I could understand that users must have understood a lot, not only about the global industry, but moreover the careers in it. Because one of the things that happen is that people think that, okay, fine, if you have to go for a particular industry, let's say pharma, so you need to have a particular degree. But like you started with saying about various other options, that was very informative, because there are many other students maybe doing a basic science or biotechnology. They can also think of this as a career option. And lastly, the point I really loved about that, I think this will really break a lot of myths, that the pharma is something like which is not very stylish, not very something which you can show it off to the world, to the society, that I'm doing B Pharm. It's like the last option. But then the kind of careers that may happen thereafter, if someone is good at it and someone can go for the higher studies, that is something which many people don't know. So from your seminar, this point has been really, really clear about it. And the I would say the overall, the way you have spoken, that also kind of exciting for many people, I would say. And for the counselors, those are have been listening to you, for them as well, because a lot of students come to them and ask for I mean, what are the options beyond let's say medicine, if somebody is doing in biology. Or sometimes people say that, well, I mean, I have kept maths in my 12th, but I also might be looking into something in biology. The people don't have options. So our counselors
Yeah.
definitely have benefited a lot from your talk and the answers that you've given. So thanks a lot, and wish you all the best. I would stay safe, and we'll chat later. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Sandeep, thanks,
Bye-bye.
Dipankar. For everybody who's there on YouTube right now, requesting you to please make sure you record your feedback. So there's a feedback link which has been shared across in the chat box. to our moderator, Mr. Thomas John. Please make sure you are, submitting your feedback. That shall be super important for us. Also, we plan to hold a number of webinars in the future. So look out for a webinar on the Wednesday, which is day after tomorrow. That would be taken care by Mr. Kedar Satyanand on the topic the situation for fresh graduates in the US during the so on that note, we take your leave. Thank you and good evening.